My name is Emily, and my wedding wasn't just about love, it was about revenge. My parents gave my brother Mark $50,000 for his wedding, but when it came to me, they said, second marriages don't count. They didn't just hurt me, they erased me like my happiness didn't matter. I remember that day so clearly, sitting in their living room, sipping coffee, smiling politely while they told me this. I was engaged to James, a man who loved me more than anyone ever had, but all I could hear in my head was my mother's voice saying those words like a cold knife. Second marriages don't count. My brother had a huge wedding, champagne, a live band, the works, and my parents paid for almost all of it. They even bragged about how much they spent. But when it was my turn, it was like I was invisible. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just said, okay, and left. But inside, I was already thinking of a plan. A plan so smooth they wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. My plan, I would still invite them. I would smile, act happy, act like I had forgiven them. But I would turn my wedding into something that would cost them more than double what they gave my brother. They would walk into my little trap on their own. And here's the thing, when you're patient, revenge tastes even sweeter. While James was busy talking about guest lists and venues, my mind was somewhere else, plotting. Oh, and before I go on, if you're watching this video, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story, and comment where you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has reached. Anyway, at first, James didn't know what I was planning. I didn't want to drag him into the storm because I knew he would try to stop me. He's the kind of man who believes in forgive and forget. But me, I believe in forgive after payback, so I pretended everything was normal. I called my mom, told her the date, invited them warmly, even said, I'd love for you to be part of it, it wouldn't be the same without you. My mom sounded surprised, probably thought I was more mature than she expected. She said, of course we'll be there. Perfect. That's all I needed. Now came the tricky part. I had to create a situation where they would feel socially and emotionally forced to spend big money on me, but in a way where they wouldn't realize it until it was too late. I didn't want them to write a check out of guilt. I wanted them to bleed money naturally, like it was their own choice. I thought about it for days. Then, one evening, while scrolling through wedding ideas, I saw it. A luxury, surprise dinner tradition where guests are invited to a separate pre-wedding celebration, and they pay for everything because it's their treat for the couple. My lips curled into a smile. This could work. If I could make them think they were in control, they would spend freely. The idea was to have the surprise party be an elite, over-the-top experience, somewhere where the bill would be massive, and they would have no polite way to back out. All I had to do was make them think it was their idea to pay. Over the next few weeks, I started planting seeds. When talking to my mom, I casually mentioned, James and I aren't sure if we'll have time for a rehearsal dinner. And then I dropped a little story about how at Mark's wedding, his in-laws hosted this amazing dinner for everyone. I knew exactly how her pride worked. She would never want to look worse than Mark's in-laws. Sure enough, she said, well, maybe we could do something like that for you too. Bingo. I pretended to be surprised. Really, that's so sweet, Mom, but you don't have to. That you don't have to was bait. People like her always bite when they feel they're making a grand gesture. By the end of that call, she was already saying she'd think of something special. I hung up, grinning. Step 1 complete, but I had to be careful. If I pushed too hard, she might pull back. I decided to wait and let her come to me with the plan. Meanwhile, I started researching the most extravagant places in the city. Luxury rooftop restaurants, private chefs, live music, champagne fountains, the works. I found the perfect spot, a private ballroom on top of a 5-star hotel with a view of the skyline at sunset. It had a minimum spend of $100,000 for the evening. My heart raced when I saw it. This would be it. The place where my parents' wallet would cry. All I had to do was make sure they picked it themselves. Over the next month, I dropped little hints in conversation, like how much I loved skyline views or how romantic sunset lighting was for photos. I didn't say it directly, but I knew my mom was listening. Then, one afternoon, I got the call I was waiting for. She said, Emily, your father and I want to do something grand for you and James before the wedding. We've been looking at venues. There's this beautiful rooftop at the Grandview Hotel. I nearly dropped my phone. They had taken the bait. I acted like I needed to think about it, but inside I was already picturing their faces when they saw the final bill. That was the moment I knew my revenge was in motion, and I was going to enjoy every single step of it. When my mom mentioned the Grandview Hotel rooftop, I played it cool, telling her I'd think about it, but inside I was already celebrating. I knew the place had a ridiculous price tag, and if they were the ones booking it, the money would come straight from their pockets. My only fear was that they might back out once they saw the numbers, so I had to make sure they were emotionally locked in before they realized the cost. The next day I called her back and said, "You know, Mom, the Grandview sounds beautiful. If that's what you really want to do for us, it could be perfect. If that's what you want was just another trick to make her feel like she was leading the whole thing. She said she'd talk to the hotel manager and set up a tour. Perfect. A week later, we all met at the Grandview for a viewing. James was there too, and I could tell he was confused about why my parents were suddenly being so generous. He gave me that suspicious side-eye like, "What's going on here?" But I just squeezed his hand and whispered, "Just go with it." The hotel was even better in person. The rooftop had twinkling string lights, glass walls with a full view of the city, and a private elevator that opened right into the event space. There was even a small stage for live music and a champagne bar in the corner. My mom kept saying things like, "Oh, this will photograph so well," and my dad was already talking about hearing a jazz band. I could almost hear their wallets screaming. The hotel manager, a very polished man in a suit, explained the packages, but he didn't say the actual price out loud. He handed my dad a printed brochure. I watched my dad's eyes widen for just a second before he quickly covered it with a polite smile. My mom said, "We'll think about it," but I could tell she was already sold. My dad might have been having second thoughts, though, so I decided to push a little. As we walked out, I casually said, "It's okay if it's too much, we can just do something simple at the community center or a small restaurant. I don't want to put pressure on you." That hit my mom's pride like a dart. She stopped walking, turned to my dad and said, "No, we can do this. It's Emily's wedding. We have to make it special." My dad didn't argue, and I knew in that moment they were locked in. Over the next 2 weeks, I let them handle all the arrangements. My mom would call me with updates about flower arrangements, menu tastings, and how she was booking a premium champagne fountain. I just kept saying, "Wow, that's amazing." Meanwhile, James started asking questions. "Emily, why are your parents suddenly spending all this money? I thought they didn't want to help." I smiled and said, "Sometimes people change their minds." But deep down, I knew they hadn't changed. They were just falling into the trap I built for them. My best friend Rachel was the only one I told the full plan to. She was both horrified and impressed. "Girl, you're cold," she said, laughing, "but I'm here for it." She even helped me make sure everything was as over the top as possible without raising suspicion. She suggested adding small details that would quietly raise the bill even more, like a dessert table with imported chocolates, a live string quartet for dinner, and personalized keepsakes for each guest. I made sure to casually mention these ideas to my mom, always with, "But only if you think it's a good idea." By the time my parents signed the final contract, the event was set to cost them well over $120,000. They still didn't seem to fully realize it, probably because they were too busy being proud of themselves for making things right with me. The irony was delicious. They thought they were fixing our relationship, but really they were paying for every tear I shed after their rejection. But the best part of my plan wasn't just the money. It was the reveal I had in mind for the actual event. I didn't want to just sit there and enjoy their expensive gift. I wanted them to know exactly what they had done, and I wanted everyone in the room to know it too. I began writing a short speech for the surprise dinner. It would start off sweet, thanking my parents for their generosity, and then, right in the middle, I would tell the whole story of how they gave my brother $50,000 but told me second marriages don't count. I wanted to watch their faces when the crowd turned to look at them. Rachel thought it was savage. James, however, still had no idea what I was up to. Part of me felt guilty for keeping him in the dark, but another part knew that if I told him, he would try to talk me out of it. And I wasn't about to waste months of planning. As the wedding date got closer, the excitement in my parents' voices grew. My mom sent me a picture of the custom invitations for the rooftop dinner. They looked like something straight out of a luxury magazine. Every time she called, I could hear the pride in her tone. And every time I thought, "You have no idea what's coming." Finally, the week of the wedding arrived. The rooftop dinner was set for the night before the ceremony. All the guests were in town, and the hotel staff had confirmed every single detail down to the exact brand of champagne and the type of roses in the centerpieces. Rachel and I arrived early to see the setup, and even I was stunned. It was like stepping into a dream. golden sunset spilling across the glass walls, music floating in the air, tables covered in silk cloths and glittering with candles. "This is insane," Rachel whispered. "I can't believe they paid for all this." I smiled and said, "Oh, believe me, they'll remember it forever." And that night, so would everyone else. The trap was ready to be sprung. The night of the rooftop dinner came faster than I expected, and as James and I were getting ready, I could feel my heart racing, not from nerves about the wedding, but from the thought of what was about to happen. I had spent months weaving this plan, planting seeds, and watching them grow into this perfect moment. The hotel had arranged for a private car to bring us to the Grandview, and when we stepped out, I could already see the warm glow from the rooftop spilling into the night sky. Guests were arriving in glamorous dresses and tailored suits, taking photos in front of the floral arch my parents had paid extra for. The air smelled like roses and champagne, and the soft notes of a live string quartet floated down the hallway. James looked around, visibly impressed, and said, "Wow, your parents really went all out." I smiled and said, "Yeah, I guess they did." Inside, Rachel was already there, pretending to mingle while keeping an eye on everything. She had been my silent partner in this entire thing, and I could tell she was just as excited as I was to see it all unfold. My parents stood near the entrance, greeting guests with proud smiles like they were hosting royalty. My mom wore a sparkling silver gown, and my dad looked sharp in a black tuxedo. They both seemed completely unaware that tonight wasn't going to be the flawless, happy moment they were imagining. As soon as they saw me, my mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm so glad you invited us to be part of this." I forced a soft smile and said, "Of course, Mom, it wouldn't be the same without you." The truth in my head, this night wouldn't even exist without them, and their $120,000 bill. The dinner began with guests sipping champagne and nibbling on delicate hors d'oeuvres served on silver trays by uniformed waiters. The city's skyline glowed behind us, and photographers, also hired by my parents, moved through the crowd capturing every laugh and smile. I could feel the eyes of the guests drifting toward me and James, admiring the scene. My parents kept introducing us to people with the same proud tone they had used for Mark's wedding years ago, the same tone they once denied me. I kept my expression warm, but inside, I was building up to my moment. During dinner, we were served course after course: lobster bisque, filet mignon, seared scallops, each dish plated like artwork. I watched as my parents beamed every time someone complimented the food or the decor. Rachel sat 2 tables away, catching my eye every now and then with a small, knowing smile. She knew the speech was coming. James leaned in and said quietly, "You should thank them tonight. They've done something incredible here." I almost laughed. Oh, I was going to thank them. Just not the way he expected. As dessert was served, a chocolate soufflé with edible gold flakes, the band transitioned into a softer melody, and I knew it was my cue. The hotel staff brought a microphone to me at my seat, and all conversations slowly faded as I stood. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady but my heart pounding with adrenaline. "First, I just want to say how grateful James and I are to be surrounded by so many people we love tonight. This dinner. This beautiful evening was made possible by 2 people who worked so hard to make it special for us, my parents." I paused as applause filled the rooftop. My mom's face lit up, my dad nodded proudly. "Perfect. They spared no expense," I continued, my tone warm but my words carefully chosen. "Just like they did for my brother Mark's wedding, when they gave him $50,000 to make his day perfect." I saw my mom's expression shift slightly, but I kept going. Of course, when it came to my turn, things were a little different. I was told, and I quote, "Second marriages don't count." A murmur ran through the crowd. My dad's jaw tightened, my mom's smile froze. I let the silence hang for just a moment. "But here's the thing about second chances," I said, looking directly at them. "They give you an opportunity to write your own ending." Tonight, thanks to my parents' generosity, I glanced at Rachel, who was barely containing her laughter. We get to celebrate in a way that will be remembered forever. There was a ripple of awkward chuckles from the guests, mixed with confused glances toward my parents. I could feel the heat of embarrassment radiating from their side of the room. I smiled sweetly, like I had just told the most heartwarming story. "So please, raise your glasses, not just for love, but for the power of making memories. No matter the cost." The crowd hesitated for a second, then lifted their glasses. My parents clinked theirs together, but their faces were pale. My dad avoided eye contact completely. My mom tried to laugh it off, but I could tell from the tightness in her voice when she whispered something to him that she was furious, and maybe just now realizing the trap she had walked into. As I sat back down, James leaned in, looking both impressed and concerned. "That was bold," he said quietly. I smiled and took a sip of champagne. "Just honest," I replied. The rest of the evening went on, but the energy had shifted. Guests kept glancing at my parents, whispering among themselves. Some of my relatives who had always suspected favoritism now had confirmation. The band played, people danced, but there was a tension in the air I could taste. My parents didn't leave early, though. I think pride kept them there, and that was fine by me. The longer they stayed, the longer they had to feel the weight of every dollar they'd spent. As the night came to a close and the guests began to leave, my mom hugged me stiffly and said, "We'll see you tomorrow at the wedding." I could tell she wanted to say more, but with people still around, she didn't dare. My dad just gave a curt nod and walked away. Rachel came up behind me and whispered, "That was savage. I love you for it." I laughed, but deep down I felt a mix of satisfaction and anticipation. The real wedding was tomorrow, and if tonight had shaken them, tomorrow might just break them. I had one last part of my plan, something they wouldn't see coming until it was right in front of their faces. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I woke up earlier than I expected, not from excitement about the ceremony, but from the rush of adrenaline that had been fueling me ever since the rooftop dinner. The speech from last night was still replaying in my head. My mom's frozen smile, my dad's tight jaw, the way the crowd murmured after I mentioned the $50,000 and second marriages don't count. It was delicious, but I knew that was just the appetizer. Today was the main course. James was still asleep, looking peaceful, completely unaware of the next part of my plan. I had spent weeks preparing this final twist, making sure it was hidden so well that even my closest relatives wouldn't suspect until it happened. I quietly slipped out of bed, made myself a coffee, and stared out the hotel window at the city's skyline. In a few hours, I'd be walking down the aisle, but my mind was on something else entirely. The look on my parents' faces when they realized what I had done. The night before, after the rooftop dinner ended, I'd overheard my mom telling one of her friends how generous they had been and how this would finally prove to everyone that they loved me just as much as Mark. That comment lit the final spark for me. I didn't just want to embarrass them. I wanted to strip away their image completely, right in front of everyone they were trying to impress. My plan for today had two layers. The first was hidden in the ceremony itself. I had arranged for the officiant during the vows segment to tell a short love story about James and me, except I had secretly rewritten it so that halfway through, it would turn into a story about family values, favoritism, and the importance of equality. I made it subtle enough to seem like a sweet message to most guests, but I knew my parents would catch every word. The second part of the plan was more visual, something that would be impossible to ignore: the seating arrangement. Normally, the bride's parents sit front and center, but I had instructed the planner to move my parents 2 rows back and put James's parents in the prime seats. My mom had no idea. I told her the front row was reserved for special reasons. The truth was, I wanted her to feel exactly what she had made me feel, like she didn't matter as much. Around 10 a.m., I met with Rachel in the bridal suite. She came bearing coffee and a wicked grin. "So what's the grand finale?" she asked, closing the door behind her. I told her everything, and her eyes widened. "Amelie, this is brutal. I love it, but wow." I shrugged. They made me feel small on one of the most important days of my life. Now it's their turn. The makeup artist arrived, and while she worked on my hair and face, Rachel kept me updated on what was happening downstairs. Apparently, my parents had arrived early and were walking around greeting guests, acting as if last night's awkward moment had never happened. Typical. James popped in about an hour later just to see me before the chaos started. He kissed my forehead and said, "I'm so ready for today." I smiled back, keeping my secret locked away. If this was going to work, he needed to be genuinely surprised too. It was almost noon when the wedding planner came in to say everything was set up. The flowers were in place, the string quartet was warming up, and the seating chart was posted at the entrance. I imagined the moment my mom saw she was sitting 2 rows back. I almost wished I could be there to watch her reaction, but I'd have to settle for Rachel's play-by-play later. When it was finally time to walk down the aisle, my heart was pounding, not from wedding nerves, but from anticipation. The music began, the guests stood, and I stepped forward, my dress trailing behind me like a wave of white silk. I glanced briefly toward the front row and saw James's parents smiling proudly in their seats. 2 rows back, my mom's expression was unreadable, but I could tell by the stiffness in her shoulders that she'd already noticed the change. My dad sat next to her, lips pressed into a thin line. The officiant began the ceremony, his voice warm and calm, guiding us through the opening words. I let myself relax just enough to enjoy the moment. After all, I was marrying James, and I did love him deeply. But my pulse quickened again when the officiant reached the part I had been waiting for. "Marriage," he said, "is not just a union between 2 people. It is a reflection of the love and support we receive from those around us. True family love shows no favoritism. It treats each moment as equally important, whether it is a first milestone or a second chance." My parents' eyes locked on me. I kept my gaze steady, smiling softly like I was just soaking in a beautiful sentiment. "It is easy to give generously when the world expects it," the officiant continued. "But the greatest acts of love are those we give when no one demands it, when we choose to make someone feel valued simply because they matter." There was a shift in the air, a quiet murmur from a few guests. My mom's cheeks flushed pink, and my dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. James looked slightly puzzled, glancing at me, but I just kept smiling. The rest of the ceremony flowed smoothly, but I knew the message had landed exactly where I wanted it to. When we kissed and walked back down the aisle, the applause was loud and joyful, but I could feel the icy stares from 2 rows back. Outside, while guests moved toward the reception area, Rachel caught up to me. "Oh my God, the seating thing worked. Your mom looked like she was chewing glass." I laughed quietly, savoring it. The reception was next, and while my parents were probably hopping to get through it without more surprises, I still had one last play, a toast that would seal the night and make sure no one forgot exactly how they had treated me. The reception hall was already buzzing when we arrived, the air thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint scent of the hundreds of white roses my parents had insisted on ordering. The place looked like a fairy tale, crystal chandeliers casting golden light across silk-draped tables, waiters gliding between guests with trays of champagne, and a live band softly playing in the corner. If you didn't know the history, you'd think this was the picture of a perfect, loving family celebration. But I knew better, and so did my parents. Every smile they wore today was stretched tight over the memory of last night's speech and the sting of being moved 2 rows back at the ceremony. I could almost feel my mom's eyes on me every time I turned my head, like she was trying to read my next move before it happened. James and I made our grand entrance as husband and wife, and the guests erupted in applause. We danced our first dance, and for a moment I let myself enjoy it, the way James held me close, the way the music swelled right as he spun me around. But even as I smiled into his shoulder, my mind was on the next part of my plan. The final toast. The one that would not only remind my parents of what they had done, but cement it in the minds of every person in this room. I didn't want to humiliate them with screaming or insults. That would make me look bitter. No, this was going to be the kind of quiet, cutting truth that lingered long after the last glass was emptied. After dinner was served, a lavish spread of steak, salmon, roasted vegetables, and gourmet pasta dishes, I saw the wedding planner making her way toward me with the microphone. This was it. The band lowered their volume, and the chatter in the room softened as I stood and faced our guests. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I began, my voice warm and steady. "It means the world to us to have so many friends and family gathered to celebrate love, because at the end of the day, that's what marriage is about, isn't it? Love and the people who support it." There were nods and soft smiles from around the room. My parents were listening closely, their expressions polite but tense. "Some of you know," I continued, "that this is my second marriage, and if you know that, you also know there are people in this room who once told me that second marriages don't count." A ripple went through the crowd, just like at the rooftop dinner. My mother's jaw tightened, my father looked away. "Those words hurt me," I said simply, "because they came from people I thought would always see my happiness as something worth celebrating, no matter what chapter of my life it happened in. But life has a funny way of giving us moments to rewrite the story. And tonight, thanks to the very same people who once made me feel small, I have the chance to feel like the most loved, valued bride in the world." A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, others raised their eyebrows at my parents. I paused to sip my champagne, letting the tension stretch just enough. "So here's to second chances," I said, raising my glass high. "May we all learn that love, whether it's the first, second, or third time around, is always worth the same celebration." The crowd cheered, some louder than others, but I caught the sharp flash in my mother's eyes and the way my father's hand tightened around his glass. They knew I had just finished the job I started last night. I handed the microphone back to the planner and sat down, smiling like I had just made the sweetest toast in the world. James leaned toward me, his voice low. "You've been making a point these last 2 nights, haven't you?" I didn't answer directly, just kissed his cheek and said, "It's important to tell the truth." The rest of the reception was a strange mix of joy and underlying tension. My friends and some of my cousins kept giving me sly smiles, clearly impressed with my ability to turn polite speeches into public reckonings. Rachel, of course, was beaming like she just watched her favorite TV drama unfold in real life. My parents, on the other hand, kept their distance. They danced a few times, chatted with other guests, but never once approached me or James. By the time the cake was cut, a towering white confection with gold leaf accents, my dad looked like he'd aged 5 years. My mom's lipstick smile was starting to crack. I thought they might leave early, but they stayed until the very end, perhaps to save face. As the final song played and guests began to gather their things, I caught my mom's gaze across the room. She held my eyes for a long moment, her face a mix of anger, hurt, and something I couldn't quite read, maybe the realization that she'd lost the upper hand for good. When it was finally time for goodbyes, they came over. My mom hugged me stiffly, whispering, "We'll talk." My dad simply shook James's hand and walked away without looking at me. I watched them go, a strange sense of calm settling over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing their approval. I had taken control of my story, and they had no choice but to sit through it. As James and I left for our honeymoon suite, Rachel caught up to me. "That," she said, "was art, pure art." I laughed, feeling the weight of months of planning finally lift. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. There would be fallout, conversations, maybe even confrontations. And honestly, I was ready for them. The morning after the wedding, sunlight poured through the curtains of the honeymoon suite, but instead of feeling relaxed and peaceful, I woke up with a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. I knew the phone calls were coming. I knew the messages would start. People talk after a wedding, always, but in my case, the talk wouldn't be about the flowers or the dress. It would be about the speeches, the seating arrangement, and the way my parents' faces had hardened every time I spoke about second marriages and equal love. James was still asleep beside me, his arm draped over my waist, his breathing slow and steady. For a moment, I just watched him, remembering why I was here in the first place, because I loved him, because I wanted a life with him. But then the reality crept back in. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I slipped out of bed quietly, not wanting to wake him, and checked the screen. 3 missed calls from my mom, 2 texts from my dad, "We need to talk," and 1 from Rachel that simply read, "The gossip train is rolling. You should hear what your Aunt Karen is saying." I smirked. If Aunt Karen was already involved, the story was spreading fast. I texted Rachel back, "Tell me everything later." Instead of calling my parents right away, I decided to enjoy breakfast in the suite with James. We ordered pancakes, eggs, and mimosas, and I pretended for an hour that we were just a normal newlywed couple starting our life together. But when the breakfast plates were cleared, I knew I couldn't avoid it much longer. My phone buzzed again. It was my mom, and this time I answered. Her voice was sharp from the moment I said hello. "Emily, what on earth was last night? And the night before? Do you have any idea how embarrassed your father and I are?" I let her rant for a moment, her words tumbling out about respect and gratitude, and how I had humiliated them in front of the entire family. When she paused for breath, I said calmly, "Do you have any idea how embarrassed I was when you told me second marriages don't count? When you treated my happiness like it was less important than Mark?" Silence. Then she tried to change the subject, saying the wedding was beautiful and that she hoped we could put this behind us. I told her putting things behind us would require honesty, and that she had never once admitted she was wrong. She scoffed, saying she had done more than enough by paying for the rooftop dinner. I almost laughed. "You mean the dinner you booked to show off, the one where you tried to make yourself look like the perfect parent?" Her tone grew colder. "You're ungrateful, Emily. You always have been." That stung not because I believed it, but because it confirmed what I'd always known. My parents saw generosity as a performance, not a feeling. "I'm not ungrateful," I said. "I'm just done pretending." She hung up without saying goodbye. A few minutes later, my dad texted me, "I agree with your mother. This has gone too far." I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the quiet settle in. James finally stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked. I hesitated, then decided it was time to tell him everything. The rooftop dinner plan, the seating change, the rewritten efficient speech. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he sighed and said, "I wish you told me. I get why you did it, but that was a lot." "It was the truth," I said simply. He nodded, but I could tell he was processing. Later that afternoon, Rachel came by the hotel before we left for our mini honeymoon. She was practically glowing with gossip. "So, your mom called your Aunt Karen this morning," she began, "and apparently she's telling people you ruined the wedding with your speeches. But get this, half the family thinks you were right to call them out. Your cousin Lisa even said she wishes she had the guts to do something like that." That made me smile. At least some people got it. But Rachel also warned me that my parents were already trying to control the narrative, telling everyone that they had gone above and beyond for me, and that I'd stabbed them in the back. I told her they could spin it however they wanted. People had heard my words straight from my mouth. Over the next few days, James and I traveled to a quiet coastal town, trying to focus on each other. But the drama followed me like a shadow. Every time I checked my phone, there was another message, some from relatives defending me, others siding with my parents, and a few just fishing for more details. I kept my responses short and neutral. The point of my plan had never been to start a family war. It was to make my parents feel what I had felt. And I knew they felt it. One night, as James and I watched the sun set over the water, he asked, "Do you think you and your parents will ever fix this?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. Maybe, but only if they admit what they did, and I don't think they will. He didn't push me further, and I was grateful. On our last day of the trip, I got an email from my mom. It was short and cold. "We're disappointed in you. Don't contact us until you're ready to apologize." I stared at it for a long time, then closed my laptop. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. They had drawn their line, and I had drawn mine. When we returned home, Rachel came over with a bottle of wine. We sat on the couch, and she asked, "Do you regret it?" I thought about the rooftop dinner, the seating arrangement, the speeches, the look on my parents' faces. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it had to come to this, but I don't regret making them see it." When I woke up the next morning, the air in my apartment felt different, lighter, somehow, like I'd finally unclenched a fist I'd been holding for years. The noise from the wedding week had died down just a little, but there were still whispers floating around the family. Rachel told me people were taking sides like it was some reality TV feud, but I didn't feel like I was in a battle anymore. The war, for me, was over. I had said what I needed to say, done what I needed to do, and my parents had heard every single word. Whether they wanted to admit it or not, they would never be able to erase the memory of the rooftop dinner, the seating at the ceremony, or my speeches in front of everyone they knew. Those moments were mine, and they had power. James was in the kitchen making coffee, and I joined him, leaning on the counter while he worked. "We've been married for a week," he said with a little smile, "and somehow the wedding still isn't the biggest thing people are talking about." I smirked. "Well, I guess I gave them a reason to remember it." He stirred his coffee, watching me carefully. "You still haven't called your parents back. They told me not to contact them until I apologized," I said, shrugging. "And I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he was thinking about how long this Cold War might last. For me, though, the silence was better than the years of pretending everything was fine. That afternoon, Rachel came over with a stack of glossy photos from the photographer. She spread them out on the coffee table, and we flipped through them together. There were shots of James and me laughing, of the skyline glowing at sunset, of guests clinking glasses and dancing. Then we came to the ones I loved most, the candid photos of my parents' faces during my speeches. In one, my mom's smile was just starting to fade, her eyes narrowing in the faintest hint of realization. In another, my dad's mouth was pressed tight, his hand frozen mid-clap. I laughed out loud, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep. "Frame that one," Rachel said, pointing to the shot where my parents looked like they'd just swallowed something sour. "Put it above your fireplace." We joked about it, but I knew I wouldn't actually hang it up. I didn't need a picture to remember their faces. I could replay them in my mind any time I wanted. Over the next couple of weeks, the messages from relatives slowed down. Some had clearly decided to stay out of it, while others were firmly in my corner. A few even told me privately that my parents had always treated Mark better and that what I did was brave. Brave wasn't the word I'd have chosen. Necessary, maybe, honest, but not brave. I started going back to my normal routine: work, dinners with James, weekend trips with friends. My parents stayed silent, just like they'd said they would. No texts, no calls, no birthday card when my birthday rolled around 2 months later. It stung a little, but I reminded myself that this wasn't about cutting them off completely. It was about changing the balance of power. If they wanted to be in my life, they would have to do it on my terms. One Sunday, I was sitting on the balcony with James, sipping coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but when I answered, it was my mom's voice on the other end. She didn't start with hello. She said, "Your father and I have been talking." I kept my voice calm. "About what?" There was a pause. "About what you said. We didn't like how you did it. We still think it was cruel, but we can't pretend we weren't wrong to say what we did about your marriage." I sat very still, letting her words sink in. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest I'd ever gotten from her. "So what now?" I asked. She sighed. "We'd like to see you, maybe have dinner, just us." My instinct was to say yes immediately, but I caught myself. "If we're going to do that," I said carefully, "it has to be real. No pretending nothing happened, and no more comparing me to Mark." Another pause. "Fine," she said. "We can try." It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall. We agreed to meet the following week at a small restaurant halfway between our homes. After I hung up, James squeezed my hand. "You think they'll actually change?" I looked out at the horizon, the sunlight warm on my face. "I don't know, but they heard me. That's more than I could say before." The night of the dinner, I wore a simple dress, nothing flashy. I didn't want this to feel like another stage for a performance. When I walked in, my parents were already seated. They looked older, tired. My mom smiled faintly, my dad gave a small nod. The conversation started awkwardly, but slowly it loosened. We talked about the wedding carefully, avoiding the parts that would reopen wounds. We talked about work, about James, even about Mark and his kids. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a competition. Halfway through the meal, my mom said, "We can't promise we'll always get it right, but we don't want to lose you." I held her gaze, searching for any sign of manipulation. But there wasn't any, at least not tonight. "Then don't," I said simply. We finished dinner, exchanged a stiff but genuine hug, and went our separate ways. In the car, I thought about how strange life can be. A year ago, I'd never have imagined I'd stand in front of 100 people and call my parents out for favoritism. I'd never have imagined they'd even halfway admit they were wrong. And yet, here we were. Maybe things would get better, maybe they wouldn't. But I knew one thing for sure. If they ever tried to treat me like I didn't count again, I wouldn't stay silent. I'd learned my voice had power, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached.